Hello, hello. Welcome to today's session of Selling the Couch. I hope you're doing well, having an incredible day. So, this will be the last episode of Selling the Couch until the fall. I like to take the summers off just with our little one. Well, she's not so little anymore, but um, with summers and travel and all the things, and just pacing myself on this podcasting journey. This is year 11 of this podcast. And one of the things I learned the hard way in the early stages is if you don't pace yourself well, you're very prone to burnout. And so I take the summer months off, record some episodes for the fall. So we have a little bit of a backlog, that kind of stuff, and mainly just spend a lot of time with family and resting and recuperating and all of that kind of stuff. Today's podcast session is based on a simple idea that is that most therapists are creating content for social media, but the internet, especially with how quickly AI is accelerating and AI search is accelerating, is quietly rewarding something completely different now. I actually think this is so good, actually, that this is happening. And I'll explain more about what that means. But Google doesn't care about your reels. Now, I know that's a very controversial statement, but the truth is it never did. But now, the gap between what ranks and what gets posted is wider than ever. And the therapists who figured this out first have an enormous advantage. So here's what I mean. On paper, creating content as a therapist makes complete sense, whether you have a private practice or you are coaching or you're expanding beyond the clinical room into things like books and talks and courses and all sorts of and retreats and stuff like that. It makes complete sense to post content because the idea is show up, post consistently, build trust over time. But here's what I have noticed. Most of these content platforms are algorithmically driven, right? So, i.e., most of that content, for the most part, the reach of it gets significantly less in somewhere between 24 to 48 hours. In other words, social media content is a perishable asset. But contrast that with a well built guide, which is a permanent asset that keeps compounding over time. The platform gets the attention, and we basically keep nothing. Now, here's some data actually back this up. By 2024, nearly 60% of Google searches were ending with 0 clicks, meaning that Google answered the question itself right at the top of the page where those like AI search results are. And what I think is the guides that win are the ones that Google is pulling from. And that's a different game entirely than how SEO has traditionally been emphasized, which is based on keywords. I've been podcasting, I've been creating content since 2015. I've watched SEO shift a lot. And if I'm being honest, for a long time, I underestimated the power of long form, depth first, and depth filled content. What changed my mind was seeing a lot of our colleagues with deeply specific written guides outperform accounts with thousands, if not tens of thousands, of followers. The internet is getting better at finding the real thing, and that's actually a good news for us as clinicians. Here's kind of the core insight that I want us to take away. And what I'll then do is kind of share the three buckets or three ideas that I would love for you to think and reflect on. So, the core insight is that generic AI content is getting buried, but AI assisted content from a credentialed clinician with real experience, that's what Google is looking for right now. Google actually released an update, and you can do a search on this, but it's called the EEAT framework. So it basically, they released this update here in the last year or so, but it's basically EEAT stands for experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And I actually looked as I was prepping for this, and I looked at Google's like own Search Central documentation, and it's within there. So basically, what it means is AI can handle structure and scale, but we supply the lived experience, the clinical nuance, the human depth, and that combination, almost nobody is doing it well yet. So the three buckets that I would love for you to think about, and I'll share what the main ideas are. So, first is what Google actually wants right now and why us as clinicians are uniquely positioned. Second, what an authoritative guide actually looks like. And third, how AI fits in as an assistant and not the author. So, the first idea is what Google actually wants right now and why we as clinicians are uniquely positioned. So, EEAT, and I think they just generally call it just EAT, isn't a trend. It's a structural shift in how content is getting ranked, confirmed by Google itself. Now, here's the part that most therapists don't know: therapy content is classified as YMYL, your money or your life, meaning Google holds it at an even higher standard than most other niches. Mental health content directly impacts people's well being. So Google scrutinizes it more heavily and rewards clinical authority more heavily. So, what specifically is being rewarded is specificity, depth, real human experience embedded in the writing and in the content creation. The average page ranking in Google's top 10 has at least 2,000 words, and the higher the ranking, the longer the content. So that doesn't mean stuff it a bunch of stuff, but it's really speaking to that Google is really valuing these sort of authoritative pieces. So the big takeaway is the therapist who writes 2,000 words about one specific population from lived and clinical experience will outrank the therapist who posts every single day. The second thing is what an authoritative guide actually looks like. This is not a blog post. It's not like a listicle. Think the definitive resource on your niche and what some of the things that they may be struggling with. So for example, depression in South Asian men, what it actually looks like, why it goes undiagnosed, and how to find support. So that a guide like that would cover things like cultural stigma, somatic symptoms, family system dynamics, barriers to help seeking. It would also cover perhaps unique things that, me as a South Asian guy would understand. So, for example, the pressure and challenge of caring for aging parents. And it's written by someone who works with this population, not just someone who Googled it and then is trying to create a guide around this. The structure is really important of these guides. So there's clear headings, real clinical insight, again, based on patterns that you're seeing, not just like one specific person. So my general thing is I would never want a single client to be able to identify what they're presenting, like if somebody were to read that guide. So I always kind of do it broad, combining a bunch of overall insights, an FAQ section, internal links, and then a soft next step. So the big takeaway is if someone lands on your guide and thinks this person gets it, that's the whole game behind EAT. The third thing is, how does AI fit into this as an assistant and not an author? This is a really important nuance. Google doesn't penalize AI assisted content. They penalize low quality content, however it's made. Over 57% of web content was AI generated in 2024, and that number is expected to hit 90% by the end of 2025. So when 90% of the internet is generic AI noise, the 10% with real human depth is actually going to win. That's the window that you and I are sitting in right now. AI is, I'm sure you're probably like me, where you went from skeptical about AI to now it's becoming a part of your infrastructure and you find yourself using it for all sorts of interesting things. But AI is brilliant at structure, it's brilliant at first drafts, FAQ generation, SEO framing, gap stopping. What AI cannot do is your clinical voice, your specific case patterns, your honest reflections. The workflow is you bring the outline and the insight, AI builds the scaffolding, and then you backfill it with depth. Think of it like a very fast research assistant who still needs you in the room. The big takeaway is AI lowers the cost of creation. Your experience is still the core product. Now, I always struggle with sharing content like this, but I wanted to share a couple of like hard truths, colleague to colleague. Most clinicians, I think, are waiting to feel like an expert before they write like one. But the guide you publish this month, that you don't publish this month, is actually helping no one. The population you specialize in is searching for answers right now and finding generic content. You already know more than you think. The guide just needs to exist. The other hard truth I wanted to pinpoint in this is I think what I notice is generally in our field, and I have a tendency to do this as well, when there's like drastic shifts in what's happening, a good majority of us have a tendency to just kind of keep our head down and put our head in the sand kind of idea and not do anything, hoping things kind of pass. I think I mean, the way that it's impacting search, I think for specialists like us, I think it's going to be such a great long-term play. But there is I feel like a small window before folks really realize like what's happening. And so I would encourage you more than anything not to just keep your head in the sand, but to be like, you know what? I don't I don't want to rely on a directory or a blog post that was doing well. Like, how can I really start to think forward thinking so that the stuff that I'm building starts to really compounding over time? This is the biggest thing I think about for STC and for Quiet Builder. I'm always thinking about slow compounding assets. A social media post, again, has like a 24 to 48 hour lifespan. If that, a well built guide has a 5 to 10-year lifespan and gets stronger over time as it earns backlinks and citations and Google trust. One guide done well can become a podcast episode or a YouTube video, a newsletter, or workshop foundation. In fact, you can actually even then supplement the guides, which is what we're doing with YouTube videos and podcast episodes and a bunch of stuff just to like even beef up guides even more. Basically, name the guide, build it once, let it work for you. Practical framework, 3 questions that I would love for you to think about as you are starting to build your own guide. Who is this for exactly? The more specific, the better it ranks, then the more it's going to resonate for folks. What do they search for when they're hurting? Not clinical language, their language. What do I know about this that nobody else has lived? That is your EEAT layer, and no AI can replicate it. When I think about therapists I've watched build real online income, it's almost always traces back to one piece of content that started working quietly in the background. A guide that they wrote at 10 p.m., a resource they almost didn't publish. The internet found it, people shared it, clients came. That's not luck. That's a compounding asset that's doing its job. As I close with this episode, the reality is the content landscape is shifting, and honestly, it's shifting in therapists' favor right now because what Google wants now is exactly what you and I already have, which is depth, specificity, and real clinical experience. You just have to put it in the right format. The guide you don't write can't help anyone. The one you do, it works while you sleep. If today's podcast session resonates and you're thinking about how to build authority in this new landscape, I know many of us are, I wanted to tell you about something we're running this July. It's a 3-week live accelerator. It's called the Quiet Authority. And here's what makes it different. I'm not teaching this just in theory. I'm doing this myself in real time and I'm building this alongside of you. We have plans to build 5 of these authoritative guides for selling the couch and 5 to 6 more for Quiet Builder. And over these 3 weeks, you'll see exactly how we build them, the prompts we use, the questions we ask, how we work with AI as an assistant without losing our credibility or our voice and without sacrificing the depth that actually makes these guides actually work. Now, more importantly, I know a lot of times when we have folks do accelerators or you hear an accelerator, you're like, that's a lot of head knowledge. Am I actually going to get time to get stuff done? You will walk away with a completed guide by the end of the 3 weeks. You get real feedback from our team throughout, you get feedback from over 18 colleagues, and a framework that you can use to keep building long after the 3 weeks are done. And if you're catching this episode way down the line, everything is recorded and lives inside of our Haven community. You can learn more about the accelerator at sellingthecouch.com/Haven. And Haven is HAVEN. Have a great rest of your summer. I appreciate you. I'm so thankful for you. And thank you for trusting me. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.